Does reading matter anymore? Yes, it does. Thank you. Now, in reality, I've been teaching English for almost 2 decades, and since the beginning of my career, up until this moment, I realized one thing. Very often, teachers, parents, and students claim that students don't like reading anymore, that books are boring, that they're not interesting, that stories don't matter, and that we are not supposed to read anymore, perhaps. However, once you start going deeper into the text, once you start reading interesting stories and texts, suddenly something magical happens, and people realize that reading is actually kind of cool. It's interesting, it's fun, and most importantly, it's about you, about us. Why is this the case? Well, we can go deep into history, and everybody here knows I love history, and so let's go back 70,000 years ago, when humanity first developed the concept of fictive language, talking about imaginary things that don't exist, things that have never existed and cannot exist. And yet, we talk about them. We talk about monsters living in the depths of seas, and we talk about aliens living in outer space and other planets. We talk about goblins and fairies, and we talk about so many different things that in reality are not really there. Fictive language that, as I mentioned, humanity developed at some point in our history has made it possible for us to talk about fiction and talk about things that are real and yet not real at the same time. How is that even possible? Books, literature, poetry, plays and novels and stories, everything we read and everything we enjoy reading is all connected with this idea of fiction and fictive language. Let me give you an example. So just last week, in fact, with some students, we read a text, a very short text, a 2-page short story that was written by a Jewish author from Lithuania, a Litvak author, and it was a text about a woman, a girl from Vilnius who was a prostitute, and a Jewish girl who lived right before the war. In the story goes that the girl keeps working. She has some entertainment, and her entertainment in the pre-war Vilnius is to go to the library and read books. While reading one of the books, she discovers a story. See how cleverly it's done. It's a story within a story. And she tells about this because it's impressive for her. The story is about a princess who was punished to be killed, and the method which was involved, I don't want to reveal too much of the plot to everyone. The method was horrifying. The story so affects the main character of the story that we read that this girl starts realizing that her job as a prostitute is not really the best way to live your life. And so things change in her head just by reading fiction. So what happens in the end is that in 1941, we know the date, it's all there. In 1941, the girl is standing in Paneriai, in the Paneriai forest. She's about to be killed by a Nazi soldier. She's standing in front of the man who is telling her, shouting, to take off her clothes, because dead people don't need clothes. And what she does is she doesn't move. She clenches her fists, she keeps the dress that she's wearing next to her, and doesn't listen to the order to remove her clothes. He doesn't care. The soldier shoots her, and she falls into the pit, along with thousands of other people. That's the story. It's fictional. It's not real. And yet the story moves us, and it talks to us about a lot of things. It talks about history, yes, but it can also allow us to speak about so many other themes and other ideas and topics that we can discuss in class. If you think about how many possible options there are to discuss, and what can we talk about this text, I need to remind you it's 2 pages long. We talk about human trafficking, we talk about forced labor, we talk about the Holocaust, we talk about history, we talk about personal choices, free will, and we talk about human rights and women's rights as part of this conversation. So many things to discuss, so many ideas to develop for us. So the question of whether it is worth reading texts or not shouldn't even cross our mind. It is important for us to develop ideas. It's important for us to also learn things about ourselves and our reaction to things. This is what we try to do in our literature classes. What kinds of books are worth reading, and what do we read? Why do we read texts like Edward II by Christopher Marlowe or Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx in our classes? Interestingly, I have a lot of students. Some of my students are queer. Some of my students are members of the LGBTQAI community. Some of them don't know that yet. And reading texts like these, concerned with topics, open up a discussion, and we can talk about a lot of things. Then we move on to other texts. We read The Vegetarian by Han Kang from South Korea, a text in which a woman wants to be a plant. A plant? Does she succeed? What happens? I mean, if you read, you will see what happens in the story. Why is it worth reading about it? Well, we talk about women's rights, we talk about people's positions in society, about liberation, about freedom, about choices. So many ideas can be packed in a single text. We read texts written by Canadian authors and Lithuanian authors and Jewish authors and African authors and Indian authors and people from all over the world. One thing is clear, that all texts speak about the same things. They speak about the basic ideas, and they raise questions of what it means to be human. You remember my question sometimes in class. I ask my students, what does it mean to human? How do you human? How do you act as a human being? And what do you do in order to be human? These are interesting questions. You think you know being humans and all, but in reality, there can be so many different answers to the same questions that it's fascinating to think about what we don't know and what we can discover by reading. Every single text that you come across in class or on your own, for me, every single text is like a circle that has a center, the original text, but no circumference. Why no circumference? Because we are it. We are supposed to make the circle ourselves. We are the ones that complete the circle. How big or how small the circle is going to be depends entirely on us, on how much we are involved, how much we want to read, how much we want to discuss and talk about the things that we read, and how much we want to think. With this in mind, there's just one piece of advice that I would like to leave you with. Actually, one word that is a piece of advice, and that's read. Thank you.